Okay, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. So I have a really cool comparison for you guys brought to you by Christopher Ward. They are, of course, out of London in the United Kingdom, and they're an independent micro brand that really grew up from a niche micro brand. In terms of the type of watch, this is an everyday watch, some key characteristics and design. When you're looking for something that you can wear every day, of course, you're going to find that versatile blend of both sporty and dressy attributes. Here you see two great examples of their, one of their new model cornerstones, the 12. You see the 38 millimeter Arctic White right next to the 40 millimeter Glacier Blue. These both go for the same price at $12.25 on the steel bracelet as seen, and these review samples were kindly lent in by the Christopher Ward team. So I'm sure you've already seen the full reviews of each of these watches elsewhere, and in terms of this channel, I know you've definitely seen the 38 millimeter 12 review. This is really not going to be just a 12 review. This is just mostly about comparing the sizes for, and I'd say, in pretty average size wrist. And I mean, if you have a smaller wrist, then it's pretty easy to go for the smallest variation, which isn't even the 38. And if you have a much larger wrist, it's pretty easy to choose the larger, the largest option that there is. But for those of you with mid-size wrists like myself, even though I'm probably on the slightly larger side of average, I will say it was a bit of a struggle to figure out if the 38 millimeter or the 40 millimeter watch were really the one for me. And I will let you know that the deciding factor was a bit of a surprise. It wasn't ultimately the diameter of the case. It was a different measurement that really makes the difference for me out of these two. So with that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get these pieces in hand, and take a closer look. Okay guys, so of course at a glance, some of you might be thinking that there's not too much of a difference between these two pieces. Some of you are seeing probably something a little bit more drastic, and ultimately I will say when you're looking at the case and dial alone, they are quite close. What really makes these different is going to be the taper relative to the bracelet. As you guys can see, much more dramatic here on the 38 millimeter versus the 40 millimeter. Also, you would see that the dial spacing on the 40 millimeter here with the blue is going to have just a little bit more breathing space, whereas the 38 millimeter dial might feel slightly cramped by comparison. I think looking at it in a vacuum, it looks great, but looking at it here, I think some people would agree that maybe the breathing space might be a little bit better on this dial in terms of it feeling quite sporty, especially with the oversized indexing there that you have with these beautifully contoured and finished indices there that were just fantastically applied on that signature textured dial. And you can see the colorways are also quite nice in terms of that white, very clear and clean, almost a shade of more of an opaline pale silver, and then here a nice pale blue that does have a lot of dimension and depth, whether it be the shifting tonality of the dial in various lighting angles, or just the choice of color in general, I think was just very clean and classic. And ultimately, these two dial options are quite versatile. But let's go over the main differences here, guys. 38 millimeters across for this guy right here and 40 millimeters across there. They're both 10.2 inches thick, so they actually have the same thickness. And then this lug to lug is slightly shorter here at 43 millimeters versus 44.2 on the 40 millimeter. Everything else is going to be shared in terms of specs. After that, you're getting flat sapphires. You're going to be getting inner AR coating on both of these, 12-sided multi-finished fixed bezel, screw down crowns that are signed, of course, with these beautiful kind of bolt-on crown guards, which also look fantastic. You're both going to get automatic Sleeta SW200-1s there, as you guys can see through those nice exhibition case backs. If I can wait for the camera to, there we go, if we can get that to focus. Same here, as you guys can see. So very comparable from that perspective, and even in terms of the regulation, in terms of the timing, just plus or minus 20 seconds per day. And, you know, that's just kind of not impressive, but people seem to really love these Sellita movements for their level of robustness and the wide compatibility, I would say, for local, servicing and everything like that. So that's quite nice. Now, the display back, as you guys noticed, it was there on both sides here. The dials both have that great 3D texture with the color matched date windows there at 6 o'clock. Multi-finished hands, guys. Check them out. Very clean, very classic, and I think flows very cohesively. You're going to get Swiss Superluminova X1 BLC1, which is just going to equate to something that has a nice, clean, white aesthetic when it is in daylight, but it will have a very nice bit of glow there in the darkness. And is it going to glow blue or is it going to glow green? Let's see if we can guess. Has a bit of a green hue to me, but I guess we're not going to know until we get to, we could cheat the system. I could give it a little blast here. Of course, under black lighting, it can make it glow a bit of a different way, but check that out. Blue. Let's see here. And again, of course, there is going to be some time for Lume shots later on. Blue. So the BL in the Lume compound is for blue, although it does mention C1. That is probably meant to reference the clear white colorway while it is in daylight. Now, both of them do have 10 atmospheres or 100 meters of water resistance, and then you're going to have these beautifully integrated bracelets. Here's where they differ. On this side here, you're going to get a 22 millimeter flare that's going to taper down to 16 millimeters on this bracelet, which flows quite nice. But 16 millimeters, I do like 16 millimeters, but typically when it's leading into, let's say, an 18 millimeter clasp, since there is, everything is tucked in, I just feel like it's a bit dramatic and a bit thin. I think if it would have maybe taken this particular taper and made it less aggressive, like it's done in 3 links. Maybe if you just had it flow down to like 4 or 5 links with a more gradual taper to 16 millimeters, I think I would have been able to feel more comfortable with it on wrist. But here definitely solves that issue, because here it's going to have a widest flare point at 24.7 millimeters, working its way down to just 18 millimeters. Now, 18 millimeters without a clasp here, or at least not a traditional one. Here you have the nice butterfly push button clasp. I will say this width flows and just, for me, doesn't look overly petite. It definitely still has more of a unisex vibe to it, and if anything, a male skewed sizing, because that for me flows quite nice. You have, of course, some nice round sections, really juxtaposing against a lot of beautiful flat finishing there, whether it be the flat polishing or some very nice bevel work. So for me, when I just look at this alone, even before it hits the wrist, that looks a bit more proportional, and this is going to look, for me anyway, just a bit slightly too skinny. Although I'll say, when I look at the dials and the cases, I would say it's probably the other way around. I really do prefer this smaller setup for the overall case, and then I think the ratios on the dial, although you could probably make the hands a little thinner and the indices thinner, and kind of reach a nicer balance. I think this has a bit of a better balance to it, but it's mainly because essentially this is scaled down without actually scaling down the indices. It still has the same size hands and indices as far as I can tell. Maybe they're slightly shorter, but in terms of kind of the line weights there, it definitely still feels quite robust and large. Maybe just a hair overly large, which makes everything else feel a bit smaller. Whereas here you're going to get something that just breathes really, really nicely. Both have these Y-Link style setups, all solid, beautifully done there. You're going to also notice, of course, they're very nice flat screw pin construction there. So very, very clean dual push button. And then you're going to have some really cool features like, check this out. Bam. That's right. Yes. On the fly toolless micro adjustment. So you can extend this based off of your wrist swelling. Same goes for the 40 millimeter here. Whether you want to, extend one side or the other, I do think that that is quite cool and quite innovative. Although I think, looks wise, of course, it could be considered a bit unsightly. At least it's underneath where nobody's really looking. And I'll say even with this extended, it has a certain level of, at least for me, a bit of visual balance that works, right? Even though you created these kind of couple of gaps there, I think that still looks quite captivating. So I do like that. So with that said, let's actually get these put on the wrist and go ahead and compare how they wear. Okay guys, as you can see on my 7.5 inch wrist, I think this looks really quite good. I will say maybe a little bit open on the dial there. Of course, if I get my wrist a bit too close to the camera lens, it's just going to make everything seem a lot bigger. But I will say, when I look at the side profile, it's thin enough and sits flat enough. And again, the bracelet to me doesn't appear overly thin. So I do like that. But of course, with that distortion, the perspective distortion, it's going to make it seem a lot larger. If I keep my wrist nice and low, check that out. It seems to be a lot more centered and you're seeing the sides of the bracelet more. Now, comparatively, check this out. I do like the case silhouette quite a bit more here, but I do feel when I look at this side view that that bracelet is just teetering a bit too close to for me anyway, a little bit of overly thin in terms of those proportions. So I do wish that it was a bit of a less aggressive taper, or if they didn't want to have this taper here where, it was going to be straight linked and kind of to the thinnest there after 3 links, I do wish that they only tapered it down to 18 millimeters versus 16 millimeters. But I think it still looks great. Of course, the nice thing with it could be something that might be a little bit too small is even when you get it, in a weird angle where it could possibly make the watch look oversized, much bigger than it appears, at least in the metal. I will say that you kind of can play with the compensation there, and a lot of people say, oh no, that fits you perfectly, it fits you like a glove. But if I put my wrist nice and low here and then tighten up the frame so that you guys can get still a detailed look but just add a bit of a true aspect ratio, at least for me, what stands out is at this angle it looks great, but once I start getting here, again, for me, it just feels a bit too thin. Whereas here, I look at that and that just feels quite proportional, and I do like that. Although I can see that, the way the dial, although I do think it is better balanced in terms of the spacing, it does feel a little bit open. And, I think maybe the more crowded dial from the 38 millimeter might be kind of making me wish that this had a little bit more of this, right? I do think this could be refined a little bit better. If of course, it would cost more money if they were using different hands and different indices there for those hour indexes. But I do feel like it could overall just look a little bit more balanced. Whereas here, I think it looks good enough. But it just feels like it's just slightly skewing towards the larger side of things. But I think these look great, guys. Ooh, check them out. I mean, they both look fantastic. They both wear quite fantastic. And again, with that quick toolless micro adjust and these beautifully flat flush fitted screws, I mean, it's all good. So with that said, let's get these off the wrist, set up for some Lume shots, light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Look at that clean blue, cool toned Lume there. Very nice. And you guys can see in the dark, they both perform very, very well. And maybe you're looking at those proportions a little bit more now in terms of the spacing, and one feeling maybe slightly a little bit more cramped and crowded than the other. But one thing I always like to work in is going to be a bit of a low light transition, because you're always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it's nice with these colors, textures, and finishes run like in less than optimal lighting, guys. And those dials, the depth, the play, the visual interest, it's just gorgeous. And again, also the finishing, the mixture of brushed and polished finishing there. So you're getting satin versus gloss. It all looks quite nice. And then I think these two very, I would say, unoffensive dial colors definitely play really well, considering that there's quite a bit going on here in terms of some of the angles, some of the shapes, and the textures, of course. So I think it all comes together actually quite well. You guys can see the Lume is quite strong, being that X1 grade. So although, X2 is out now, this definitely is still a step up against your typical BGW9 or C1. So I think that is very, very cool, guys. Oof, which one do you guys prefer out of these two? I have to say, I'm torn. I am torn. I think I'm more okay wearing the 40, whereas although I'm probably not as excited to wear the 40, but the 38, I feel like I'm probably a little bit more excited to wear it, but ultimately it leaves me wishing that there were tweaks, like I wish they could just, make the strap, the bracelet taper just be a little bit less aggressive. I think that'd be great. And yeah, I mean, that's the tough part for me. So closing thoughts, guys, on the wrist, I may slightly prefer the 38mm case, but I do greatly prefer the profile and taper of the 40mm bracelet. In terms of model variants, guys, definitely check the site links for current options and availability. There are quite a few options from any Christopher Ward, really, but in this case, the 12, being quite a robust line that's growing, exponentially right now. So in terms of comparable models, guys, there are a lot of Genta-esque integrated steel sports watches currently on the market, but Christopher Ward has priced the 12 above the majority of entry-level offerings, while being priced well below any of, I'd say, the more traditional mid-tier competitors. So there's definitely a lot to kind of chew on there. It's in a bit of a sweet spot, but at the same time, maybe it's in a bit of a no man's land, depending on how you look at it. So for me, guys, bottom line, if I had to choose between the 38mm and the 40mm for my 7.5-inch wrists that are also 19 centimeters, if you count that way, I think I would go with the 40mm, although the dial might feel a touch larger than I'd prefer for this type of watch. The bracelet makes up for it by perfectly hitting the proportional sweet spot on the wrist. But what do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments below. If you liked the video, please do a like. And if you're already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.